So welcome back, everyone. We are ready to start our second session of the day, second and last session of the day, which will be hosted by Kevin Lamping, who's going to be talking about WebdriverIO, the UI test framework that's here to stay. Just a quick bio on Kevin and a quick introduction. He's very famous. I've been following him personally for the last few years. He's the author of the online video course, Learn WebdriverIO. He's got over 10 years of experience as a front-end engineer, and he's also released a 6-day email course on visual regression testing and runs frontendtesting.com. He's presented multiple times and also has been a previous speaker at with BrowserStack. So really glad to have him back. He also runs testyourlog.in and hillcountry.js, a front-end meetup in San Antonio. With that, Kevin, I'd like to hand it over to you, and good luck.
Thanks. Let's go ahead and share my screen. Okay, is it sharing and everything?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, first I'll apologize. I've got a bit of a head cold today. I've been dealing with that, so hopefully my voice isn't too worn out and I don't have to take too many breaks to blow my nose or anything. But yeah, first I want to thank BrowserStack for hosting this. I'm really happy to see how it covers this wide range of all the different frameworks out there that you can choose from. I think that's really important for us as test automation folk to understand how each framework or each tool can benefit certain parts. And so I think any tool you go with, I'll be talking about WebdriverIO, but essentially any tool you go with will be more than capable to get the job done. And it's about finding like what you feel fits best for you and not the ultimate tool or anything like that. So again, I want to thank them for that. Anyway, let's get started. I'll talk a little bit about who I am to start off, even though Praveen already mentioned a few things. But I'm a front-end engineer and tester. So I work in the front end, HTML, CSS, and a fair bit of JavaScript. And I also think about how to test that front end. And so that's kind of my background there. I am a technical steering committee member of WebdriverIO. So I've been working with WebdriverIO for probably half a decade now, 5 or 6 years, and have been able to work with the project close enough that I've become a member of this main committee that helps move the project forward and make sure that it's running nice and well. I've got a course, an online course. If you go to learn.webdriver.io, I teach web app testing with WebdriverIO. And that course is in early access, but I've got 11 videos already available. I've got 2 more ready to publish. I just got to do some final tweaks on them. And then I've got probably another 40 planned, and I'll be releasing those on a semi-monthly basis. So every few weeks, I'll be adding some more videos. If you want, I also have a YouTube channel, videos.clamp.in. I post there regularly. Those are a little bit less polished. I take a little bit less time to put those together, but I think there's definitely a value to that because I get to spend or talk about things that aren't quite as mainstream. And so a little bit more around the edges of around testing and check out new tools and things that really wouldn't fit in an official course, but are still important to know about. I've got a book. You go to book.clamp.in. That's the web app testing guidebook. I finished that last year. It's 250 pages of how to test a real world website using WebdriverIO, and something I'm really proud of, and working on keeping that up to date as well. And finally, if you want to reach me, you can email me@clamp.in. So with that, let's get into what WebdriverIO is. Well, it is a full-featured automation framework. So it's not just testing in browsers, it's also testing in mobile, it's also testing performance, but not just a single focus. It's got a more broad focus, and it's really this framework that allows you to write tests for the front end, and I really like that. It's not tied to just Selenium or WebDriver or just WebDriver. I'm so used to saying WebdriverIO, just WebDriver. It also has Chrome DevTools support and is adding kind of branching out and seeing what is what's available for them to add to the framework. It's a very feature rich, I will say. One good example of this is the test framework, or the yeah. So WebdriverIO is a framework, but it also has test runner frameworks. These examples: Mocha, Jasmine, Cucumber. It supports any one of those, and I prefer Mocha, but a lot of people prefer Cucumber or Jasmine. So it allows you to pick what style you like best. And it's also very extendable, and we'll be looking at some examples of this, but I think it's a really an important feature because it's not just what it provides out of the box, it's also third-party services and what the community has built around it through this very extendable interface that makes it easy to integrate other services, and we'll be taking a lot of looks at that. Finally, one thing that's important for me is that it's written in Node.js. As a front end engineer, I like writing in JavaScript. It's the language of choice for me. And so having a test automation tool that is also in JavaScript is really important because I don't have to make that cognitive switch between writing in JavaScript and writing in some other language. It's just all JavaScript for my front end development. I talked a little bit about extendability. Well, there's services and reporters available to choose from. And so we have this very large list of services that you can check out. Appium is one integration. High up on that list is BrowserStack. So if you use BrowserStack, there's a BrowserStack service that allows you to easily set up your BrowserStack credentials and API key, and then run your test in BrowserStack. And we will be taking a look at that when we get to the demo. But there's also many other services out there. This is not a full list. Many have been added since I've taken a screenshot. There's also different reporters, so it tells you how you want to um, report your test results. Allure reporter is a very popular one because it gives you a full HTML site that is a lot easier to digest, especially if you're running your test in a CI/CD solution. You can get that website instead of having to run through your CI/CD logs. Also, a lot of niceties to the framework that I'd like to talk about. More compact test writing. We'll take a look at an example of that in just a minute, but it is very focused on how can you get the most tests written without having to be very verbose in how you write those tests. There is implicit waiting for elements. This is actually a newer feature. I think it came about in version 6. WebdriverIO is currently on version 7. Um, but this came about in version 6. So basically, if you want to click an element, it will implicitly wait for that element to exist on the page before trying to click it. And that just makes things a little bit easier when you're writing your test. Again, going back to more compact test writing, you don't have to say, wait for this element to appear on the page and then click it. You just say, click this element. There are still times, I'll say, there are still times when you need to wait, and it has some really good wait functionality. But for kind of the standard stuff that you'd want, it's kind of built in now. It's React friendly, so this has been a community addition to add support for fetching components by their name, their prop, their state, also Shadow DOM support. And I'll talk a lot about the community because the community has really driven this project forward and added a lot of functionality that wouldn't be possible if it was just the core members talking or building out the framework. It comes with a configuration utility. We will take a look at that in the demo. So it essentially helps you get started with writing your tests super fast because it asks you, how you want to get everything set up, and kind of gets it up and running for you. And then there's also these hooks for custom integrations. I talked about those services. Those services use these hooks so that you can jump in at certain points of the test run flow. So before you start your test, before you start a specific test, after a test ends, and after all your test ends. Those are some examples of hooks, and they're really valuable when you want to add that extendability to the framework. So I mentioned concise test writing. So here we have a standard, I think this is WebdriverJS format code. So you have to do driver.find element, and then you have to pass in your selector type. So we'll say by ID. So we're going to look for an element that has an ID of submit, and then we're going to click that element. So instead of doing this, we would have something much simpler. We write $, then our selector, and we're going to pass in a CSS selector. So this could be the ID, which is the pound sign here, or it could be a class, which would be a period. And so we don't have to specify that by ID. It uses the CSS selector format, which again, coming back to someone like myself, is really valuable for me because that's where I'm thinking. I'm thinking about how do I write these CSS selectors? And I do that same thing in WebdriverIO. And then we run the click command as expected. And if you recognize that $sign from jQuery days, that's kind of where it pulled that style from. So a lot more concise when you're writing your tests. I mentioned the configuration of the utility. This is kind of what it looks like. But again, it asks you a series of questions to let you configure how you want to write your test. And it gets it all set up for you. It's really nice. From a technical standpoint, you need to have Node version 12 or higher. 12, 14, 16 all work. You need to have Chrome or a Blink-based browser, although that I really should have mentioned that that's optional because you can also install a browser driver like Chrome driver or Gecko driver, or it might be Edge driver. Very creative naming. But you can run it through a browser driver, or you can have a Selenium server up and running. You actually don't need to install Selenium server manually. There's part of that configuration utility allows you to get it set up automatically. And there's a Selenium server, Selenium standalone server service. That's a lot of S's. So it's pretty pared down. It used to, WebdriverIO used to require Python. It no longer requires Python. It used to have Java installed so that you could run Selenium server. You don't need that because you can run it through Chrome driver or just through Chrome DevTools by having Chrome installed. You don't even need to have Chrome driver set up. So with all that, let's get to a demo. Okay, so what I've gotten set up right now is a new folder, and I actually, for the sake of time and internet connection wonkiness, I've run the install myself, but I'm going to walk you through what it would be like. So the first thing I'll do is set up a new npm project that would create a package JSON file that's going to store all of our dependencies. I'm going to not do that because I don't want it to overwrite my current package JSON file. Next, I will install the WebdriverIO command line interface, and that's going to install the command line interface plus some dependencies, including the core WebdriverIO framework itself. Let's assume that runs. You know how long some of these installs can run, so I'm not going to do it right now, but let's assume that ran and everything went great. The next thing we do is call the config utility, and I'll do that by doing npx wdio config. So WDIO is a command line interface that gets installed to our node modules directory, and we can call it by using npx. And we'll say we want to set up a config file. So it asks us where our automation backend is located. We could go with our local machine using something like Chrome driver or Chrome itself. We're going to choose BrowserStack for the sake of this demo. The host address of that cloud service, I'll just hit enter because we'll go with the defaults, the port, and then it's going to ask environment variables for our username, which I've already got set up before this, and our access key. That's all set up behind the scenes. Then it asks us which framework we want to use. So I mentioned that we have Mocha, Jasmine, Cucumber. So I'll stick with Mocha. That's my favorite test framework to write in. It also has some compilation support. So if you add TypeScript, it will automatically compile TypeScript files for you, which is a really nice feature. And you don't have to manually compile your TypeScript before running your tests. Pretty nice. We're not going to worry about that right now, so we'll hit no. Ask where our tests are located. We'll just go with the default here. If you notice, that is a glob pattern. So **** basically says any folder inside of specs and any file that ends in .js. If we had chosen TypeScript in the compiler, that would be .ts. Kind of neat. It now asks if you want to auto-generate some test files. This is really helpful if you're new to the framework and kind of want to see an example. So we'll hit yes. And then also talks about if you want to try using page objects. Again, we'll say yes because that's a good thing to kind of cover how that's set up. Asks where our page objects are located. We'll go with the defaults there. Now it asks us what reporter we'd like to use. We can choose from any of these. So we can add JUnit, we can add Allure, I'm going to stick with just spec, but there's a fair number of reporters there. It does cycle around. So we'll stick with spec. Then ask if there's any services we want to get set up. We can do Chrome driver is enabled by default. I'll turn on Selenium standalone because I'll show that off in just a minute. But hey, look, there's BrowserStack service that I mentioned. Also, Appium, Applitools are some popular ones. There's some mocking stuff in there. Yeah, there's a lot of services, as I mentioned. There's a Chrome driver again. So I'll hit enter. And then the last question is, what is the base URL? The base URL is basically your base URL that you want to run your test on. So this could be a local server. This could be a production server. And back to that concise test writing, when you say that you want to go to a specific URL, when you have your base URL set, you don't have to type that base URL again and again and again in all of your tests. You can build off the relative path of that URL. And that makes it really helpful because if you want to, as you would kind of expect, to have multiple servers that you want to test on, so a local server, various staging servers, all you have to do is change that base URL one time, and it affects all of your tests because all of your tests, their URLs are based off of the base URL. It's not hard coded into your tests. It's really nice. So at this point, I'm going to actually exit out of this because what it would do, it would completely rewrite my config file that I've customized just a little bit, and then it would try to install the services and reporters that I had asked for. And I don't want it doing that because I don't want to spend extra time on this. But the next step that we're going to run is our test. So now we have this config file, which we'll take a look at in a minute. I'll hit npx WDIO. I won't pass in the config. It does create this conf.js file, but we don't need to pass that in because it defaults to that file name. And I'll show you real quick. You see we have a configuration file that got generated by this utility. We have our test folder with those auto-generated example files. Then we have our package.json as well, and then all of our node modules. Anyway, I'll clear this and let's go ahead and run our tests. Now, this is going to run in BrowserStack. So you see we've got an onPrepare hook, an onWorkerStart hook. We've got our BrowserStack session already set up. So this was already configured by just setting that configuration utility, everything in there. We're running in Firefox. You can see all the session. This is all the log output. It's running through this. You can customize how much log output occurs with your tests. We've got it pretty verbose right now, but you can turn that down if it's too much. Here is our spec reporter output. So it tells you the name of your tests, the name of your suite, and then the name of your test, and you see it passed. So that's great. Let's jump over to our BrowserStack session, and here is that, our BrowserStack dashboard. Here's the test that just ran. You see a few seconds ago, it passed, and all the great stuff about the BrowserStack dashboard that you can get into. So we can actually see this test running real quick. So it goes to this example login page, loads it. It actually entered that username and password so fast that it didn't show on here. But now we're logged in and our test ran just fine. You can see I've run a few tests here. So that's the BrowserStack integration. Now, when I use a cloud service for running my test, I usually use that in a CI/CD environment. And then for local test writing, I run it through Chrome driver or Selenium standalone. So let's take a look at what it's like to run it locally. So what I'll first do is, actually, I don't need to do this. I already installed the Selenium standalone service during my config utility. So all I have to do is enable that. So this is the config file that was generated. Let me take a quick sip of tea. Here's the user for the BrowserStack user, the key. These are all our configurations for all of our tests. Here's that test specs path. This is actually an array, so we can have multiple spots if we want to, I don't know, have some other one that's named SPI. You can also exclude certain files if you'd like. there is the ability to run multiple browsers at once, which is something that BrowserStack offers, the ability to run parallel tests. So here we have it set to 10. So if we have multiple test files, we can run up to 10 tests at once, which really helps speed up the speed of your tests. We can set that individually per capability. So capabilities are the browsers that you want to run your tests on. Here we have it set to Firefox. We could change that if we want. We can change the max instances. We can actually change the specs that we're going to run. So if you want to run only certain tests in a specific browser or exclude certain tests in a specific browser, you can set that up through this capabilities. Here's that log level that I mentioned with the different log types. The base URL, we're going to skip past some of that because we want to get to here. And now I'm going to change this service to be Selenium standalone. And I got rid of the BrowserStack one because we're running these tests locally instead of through BrowserStack. Let's jump back here. I'll go and clear it again. And I'm just going to run my test again. And this time it's going to run through Selenium standalone. So you'll see some information pop up about that. And let's see if the browser actually shows locally. Oh, that's interesting. I must have something configured wrong. It didn't connect to Selenium. So since it didn't connect to Selenium, there's something wrong there. I'll show a different one. I'm going to comment out this service. So now I don't have any services. And let's show it run through Chrome DevTools. It will default to Chrome DevTool protocol, which is different from the WebDriver protocol. And it will use Puppeteer to start a new Chrome session and run through there if everything works right. So it says, oh, it's trying to use, oh, gotta change one more configuration. Sorry for that. I need to comment out the username and key. When you have these defined, it says, oh, we're using BrowserStack, and so try and set up through there. We don't want to do that. So let's go back. And try running this. Third time's a charm, right? There we go. Oh, it's trying to use Firefox. I wonder if this is actually going to work. I think I need to change my browser to use Chrome if I want to use the Chrome DevTools protocol. I don't know if Firefox actually supports Chrome DevTools or not. It is popping up that browser, but see, this is what happens when you try to get your demo be a little too fancy, is you end up with these few little edge cases that really ruin a very smooth demo. Okay, what I did, I changed Firefox to be Chrome. And now, see, I changed that back to Chrome. Now it should work, which I've said many times already, but I'm more confident now. So here it says it's using the DevTools protocol. It's launching Chrome with certain flags. See, it's connected to Puppeteer using this browser, and it's navigating to it. And you just saw it for a brief second. That was the browser that was popped up, and it ran through Chrome. So it takes a little bit of configuration to be able to switch back and forth between Chrome DevTools or Selenium standalone and a service like BrowserStack. But because this is written in JavaScript and it's using this exports.config, we can actually do some more advanced functionality of having a second configuration file set up just to run in BrowserStack or just to run locally, and then import our main configuration, overwrite those few settings that we need, like the user and key, and then have it run in our special session. Pretty neat. Let's take a quick look through the test itself. So in our specs E2E file, this is how the test looks. So we load in our page objects. We use Mocha to describe our suite. And then we use the it function to describe our tests. You can see it's running in async mode. We'll talk a little bit about async mode just a little bit later, but we're going to wait for the login page to open. And let's go ahead, since I'm looking at this, this is our page object. So I don't want to get too much into page objects, but it just uses plain JavaScript to write our page objects. And you see there is these this open function down here that is also available here, or that is called here. And that returns super.open.login. Super is in reference to this page. So if we open up that page, you see there's the open function that basically just runs browser.url. Now you see I have the full path here, but if I wanted to use that base URL, I could change that to be a relative path, come back to my configuration file, go to base URL, wherever that is, and set that there. And now that path is not hard-coded into my test, it's all relative. And if I wanted to change that on a test by test case, I would run npm x WDIO, and then I would pass in an option of base URL, and I would set that to my staging site or whatever my staging site is. And now when it runs the test, it goes to this URL instead of the base URL defined in my configuration file. Back to the test. So we've opened the page. Now we need to log in. So we're going to pass in the username and password, which gets passed to this login function, the username and password. And one of the updates that's coming to WebdriverIO fairly soon is to make this a little bit nicer so that it'll look like this instead of having to do this kind of clunky double await. This will be in the next month or two, this update will be out there, and it's going to be really helpful because this double await is honestly kind of ugly. And so looking forward to that update. But we set the value, we get our input username, which is defined up here. There's our CSS selector. We set the value of the username, we set the value of the password, and then we click the button. Once that is done, we're going to run an assertion. And this expect, that's built into WebdriverIO. That's new in version 6 as well, to have that expect. And it's also got really nice to be existing that checks that the HTML element exists on the page. We also have to have text containing, that checks that it has, that this element has this specific text, or maybe not this specific text because we're talking about containing, but it contains this specific text is what I should have said. And that's what that basic page object looks like. So that's a quick overview of what a test in WebdriverIO looks like with page objects and all that. Once you get used to the syntax, I really enjoy writing tests in this framework, which makes it much easier to do my job. One other thing I want to mention before we get back to the slides is the hooks that I talked about. So here's where you can define your various hooks that you want to set up. So I can have an onPrepare hook that gets executed before all your workers are launched. And this is a nice place to set up maybe some global variables or some custom commands that you have. There's also a before test that gets run. So before the specific test is run, you can run some stuff. You can also check after your test. Oops. And you can see if there was an error in the test and handle it if there was an error. There's also the ability to retry your test, which is pretty nice. If your test fails, you can automatically have it retry, which is really helpful for certain instances where a test is flaky, not because of the test itself, but just because the server might have something unique about it that can cause some flakiness. Ideally, we fix the flakiness issue, but when you're dealing with third-party services that sometimes don't have a failure in their API, this can be really helpful because you're just like, I can't fix that API. I'm gonna I'm just gonna retry and run it again. So those are hooks. All of this is in the configuration file, and our services use those hooks as well. Okay, so that's the demo of what WebdriverIO is. Let's jump back into why I think WebdriverIO is here to stay. And before I do that, I'm going to blow my nose because I am a little stuffed up. Kind of reset just a little bit. Okay. Now, I've talked about why or what WebdriverIO is. I've given that demo. Let's talk about why I think it's here to stay. And this is kind of my opinion on the project, but I think it's a valid opinion. There are 4 main reasons why I think it's here to stay. The features of the framework have been refined through multiple evolutions. The framework has been around for 6 or 7 years now, and it's really, really evolved over that period of time. And some pretty major updates have happened through that. But I think what's really come together is this really refined set of features that are really valuable and aren't just extra fluff. It's really based off of experience of using the framework and knowing what works and what doesn't work. So I think that's a really great facet of the framework. It has a very active and growing community. We'll talk about that. It's got a maturing project ownership. So the project ownership has been around for a while, but it's really in the past year or so kind of matured in formalizing a lot of how project ownership runs. And then I also think the framework and the project itself has developed this resilience through having to work through some tough times. So let's jump into these features that I'd like to see. So uh, back in version 3, hooks and services didn't really exist. They weren't built into the framework. It was basically if you get what you get from WebdriverIO is what you get, and it was not impossible, but it certainly wasn't simple to add third-party functionality or custom functionality. And so this is one of those features that didn't have to get added to the framework, but was really forward-looking in that um, the team knew that this is going to be that they couldn't write all the functionality that everybody would need. So we need a way to allow everybody to write their own functionality. And so from the version 4 update, they added these hooks and services, and it was such a great idea to add those because they're very useful and really make integrating third-party services much easier. The project has also tackled tech debt head on. In the version 4 to version 5 update, um, basically version 4 was kind of, I'd say maybe the preteen or teenager years of the project. And so it had grown to understand a lot of good things, but had some messy aspects to it. There was some naming pattern inconsistencies with some of the functions or some of the commands. There was the parameters that you would pass in were inconsistent, and then the project the code repository itself was a bit of a mess. It was hard to keep everything organized. It was hard to release specific aspects. So what they did was they were just like, we're gonna um, tackle this and really work and make this major release that's going to cause a little bit of pain, but it's going to get rid of this tech debt that has started accumulating in the project. So that version 5 update was a pretty big update, but it really helped set the future for the project going forward. And this happened 4 years ago, I think. And it was really great to see this change. From that, there has also been a community-driven feature support. So one of the things that dropped off when the version 5 update came was Cucumber JS support. Um, Unfortunately, the main developers on the project weren't able to spend the time needed to migrate Cucumber from the old version 4 version or format to the newer version 5 format. And the community really requested this to happen. So what occurred was that the community came together and built the feature support for Cucumber JS. And shortly after version 5 was released, maybe a couple months, Cucumber support was added through the community contributing code. And that's just such a great sign to me because there's only so much that the core team can do, and having the community involved and able to make these updates is really important because it's what's going to keep the project moving forward, especially when you're talking about third-party integrations. And last, this isn't really a history of it, but adding forward-looking features. WebdriverIO could have been fine sticking with Selenium or sticking with just WebDriver. But looking into the future, Chrome DevTools protocol came out, and we saw that this is a feature that would be really valuable for testers. Maybe it's not something necessary for the way that they currently write their tests, but it adds some functionality like Google Lighthouse integration where they can check the performance of their pages, something you normally wouldn't do through just UI tests. Now we're getting into performance testing, and this is a feature that maybe not a lot of people are going to use right off the bat, but is something that is going to be really powerful moving down the line. I mentioned the community, and I'm going to mention it again and again, but some great examples of how the community is growing and active is we've got a chat room, gitter.im/webdriverio/webdriverio, that anybody can go to and ask questions in. And you don't always get your questions answered because sometimes there's this is a free chat room. So nobody is paid to answer these questions. That comes out of their free time. Um, and some of the questions can be very specific to your project, and it's a little bit difficult to explain what's going on. But I think a lot of questions get answered there, and it's a very collaborative approach of let me help you with this, and then when I run into my own problem, you can help me problem solve what's going on there. So it's really great to see this active chat room, and there's hundreds of messages in there every day. We also have Q&A going on in Stack Overflow. So you see 1,300 questions asked over the years. And I try and answer some questions there. I haven't been too active there recently. I've got a lot of other stuff going on. But it's another great place to ask questions and kind of get some more support, especially if you need to add some detail on what your question's about. And then the community has grown in that I see a lot more people talking about WebdriverIO in videos like on YouTube, in blog articles on like dev.to. I see a lot of I'm seeing more WebdriverIO posts on there. Um, and then also some courses. There's several other courses. I mentioned mine, but there are actually other courses out there, so if you want to take a look at those, feel free to. It's great to see that community kind of growing up. And then it's also a very global community. So there's users and contributors from all over the world. It's really great to see that it's not located to a specific place. It really is worldwide. And then also the project itself and the leadership, the technical steering committee, the core members, they're not tied to a specific company. We're not all just working for a specific company. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily bad, but I think there are some benefits to being outside of one specific company. So if that's something that you prefer to have that, then this is something to know about. And if you actually prefer to have the project tied to a specific company and know that it's got that backing, well, then maybe WebdriverIO isn't quite what you're looking for. So that's kind of why I want to mention it. Is that it's got its benefits, it's got its drawbacks. So I kind of want to talk about that. The project ownership I mentioned is maturing. So we've worked as a core team for several years now, but recently we've added a few things. One of those is OpenJS Foundation membership. So the OpenJS Foundation is kind of home to all these open source JavaScript projects, and WebdriverIO is one of those projects. And this allows us to be a little bit more formal in our approach to running the project, talking at conferences, and getting support from this foundation to help us move forward and come to the right decision when it comes to how to run the project. We also have TideLift support. TideLift is a subscription model for enterprises who are looking to get support and to support themselves and to support open source projects that they rely on. So here, if you have a Tidelift subscription and there's a certain feature that you want to have WebdriverIO have, you can use your Tidelift subscription to um, help finance, in a way, that feature being written by uh, the core members of WebdriverIO. Really nice. It also comes with a few other things, including some licensing stuff as well. And then along with financing, very recently we've got Open Collective set up. So that allows people to make donations to the project, and those donations are used to help uh, fund people who want to work on the project, but maybe don't have that extra free time out, or maybe they have the free time, but they need to, pay bills. Everybody's got to pay bills. And so this is a way to help financially support contributors who don't have the luxury of having a lot of free time on their hands. So this is really great to see. The last major item I want to talk about is resilience after roadblocks. So I had mentioned async in 08, and what happened here is WebdriverIO has supported what's called sync mode for many years now, and unfortunately, due to a third-party update, sync mode is going to lose support. So this is something that we knew was coming down the pipeline, but we really hadn't developed a plan for it yet. And but in Node version 16, there was a change to Node version 16 that just the third party tool that we were using just didn't work anymore. And that third party tool isn't going to fix it because it's just too much to rewrite. And so this is a pretty big update. You had seen that async and await keywords in the code. That was in reference to this sync mode. In sync mode, you don't have to put those in there. In async mode, you do. So this was a major change, and there were a few options to go with. So what project leadership did, they decided, instead of us coming up with the option to go with, let's ask the community. So there's this thread that was opened up with the various options to go with. And we got the community feedback of, this is really what I think is the best option long term, and came to a mutual agreement that this is the path we're going to go with. It's not, for me, it's not what I would have, it's not what I wouldn't have chosen. It's just not ideal because I would have loved to keep sync mode around, but understanding how the the technical limitations in place, I think the decision to switch from sync mode to async mode was the right one. So it's a difficult change, but it is necessary. And one of the things that we came to is when I had those two await statements, that change to have a single await statement was driven by this conversation. We said, okay, we're going to switch to async mode, but this double await is so clunky. So let's go ahead and resolve that. So there's a PR open right now that will resolve it when it gets merged in, and that's going to be really helpful. Looking at the project future, my voice is starting to crack, so I need to get some liquid. The project future, what's coming down the pipeline? This isn't so much here to stay, just what's coming. The async mode transition, that's a big one. And I mentioned it a lot, so I won't go too much, but that's definitely in the very near future is making this transition. We're also going to add continued more Chrome DevTools support, specifically around Google Lighthouse, and get performance testing really maybe not a main feature, but a important feature of the framework. We're going to add more debugging functionality. So this is honestly, if you're like me, at least 50% of your test coding time is spent debugging your tests to figure out whether it's the test that broke, whether it's some change on the page that is broken for the test but not for the user, or a change on the page that is broken for the user. So being able to debug effectively and efficiently is really important, and this is something that we're kind of focused on, of adding some functionality around that. And then we're adding support for multiple environments. So I mentioned WebdriverIO runs in Node.js, but we also are looking at allowing it to run in the browser. And this adds a few extra features and kind of expands the scope that WebdriverIO can serve. So it's really nice to see. Okay, that's about going to wrap it up. If you want to learn more, go to WebdriverIO. That's the that's the main website that has all the API documentation. It has guides on it. It has information about the community, all that. I've got my course, learn.webdriver.io. Again, it's in early access, so I'm still working on putting together the videos, but I've got the first 11 videos available. I'm got 2 more queued up, and I've got a lot of ideas coming in the future. You can check out my YouTube channel as well. I've got that book that is finished and is available. And as always, if you want to reach out to me individually, you can email me at clamp.in. Okay, thank you all for joining, and let's open it up to questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Kevin. It was a great session. I think all of your sessions have been like really well received. So thank you for doing that. Awesome. Kevin, if you could just stop sharing your screen and I can share mine. Awesome. Cool. So I think just we're gonna get into Q&A. Before that, quickly, again, our team's gonna just put up a poll. If you'd like somebody from BrowserStack to get in touch with you, please do answer that poll and we'll get in touch with you right away. Awesome. So let's get into Q&A now. So let me go through the questions. Okay, so one question is around, I think you talked about async being sort of one of the things in the way the WebdriverIO works. And I think there are some issues with sync mode being phased out and moving into async await syntax. What's the state of things there?
Yeah, so about a couple months ago, we weren't certain whether we were going to keep sync mode or not. There was kind of this proof of concept test to see if we can do it, but unfortunately, there were just these technical limitations that didn't allow for it. So sync mode is going away. However, you have about 2 years before it's officially gone. And as long as you stick to Node version 14 and below, you can continue using sync mode for at least 2 years. WebdriverIO will officially support sync mode for that period of time. And I think it's related to how long Node.js is going to support version 14. So yeah, but if you're writing a new project or you just want to make the transition today, wait, I think maybe another month, and that new await format is going to be out, and that's going to really help with keeping those tests concise and stuff. So that's kind of how it's going. And if this is actually something I talk about on my YouTube channel, and I might post another video about that there soon.
Awesome. I think just talking about await statements, I think you mentioned that WebDriver uses implicit waits. So but in the demo you were using awaits. Any specific reason for that?
That's a different type of waiting. So awaits are used in Node.js. The implicit waiting that WebdriverIO does is waiting for elements to exist on the page before running the command. So it's a different layer that we're talking about between those two.
Okay. There's a question around what kind of API mocking service can I use with WebdriverIO?
Mocking service? There's a few out there. There's the wire mock service, and I haven't used a lot of mocking services, but wire mock is one. If you're using Chrome DevTools, if you go through the Chrome DevTools protocol, there's actually these network mocks. And if you go to, this is, I think in version 7, they've kind of added this, the WebdriverIO website, and you go to the blog section, there's one or two blog posts on network mocks. So that allows you to intercept the network requests being sent out or being returned, and you can kind of customize it yourself. So that's pretty nice. Um, there are some other mocks, but that's kind of the main one that I would focus on.
Okay. Question on, can I use WebdriverIO for React Native mobile apps also?
WebdriverIO does have Appium support, and I think that ties into React Native as well. I haven't dabbled into that, so I can't say for certain, but it does have those the core React support for like props, fetching things by props, and checking DOM, shadow DOM, and stuff like that. But I think it's possible. I can't really confirm, but through Appium, getting that set up and running is kind of how I would do that.
Sure. Okay. Can we use WebdriverIO for TDD?
Yep. Well, sorry, I jumped the gun a little bit on that. There's the Mocha UI format that's called TDD. That's what I was thinking. But for test-driven development, I don't know, because we're talking about UI tests specifically, and I don't know how well TDD fits into UI tests. UI tests really have to know what the website looks like before it can run the code. You have to know what your CSS selectors are going to be. You have to know what your buttons are going to be, that sort of thing. And one of the things when you're developing sites is that they go through a lot of changes over the development lifecycle, or really the project life cycle. I don't know how many times the number of times that I've handed off a project or provided a demo to a client and them not wanting some change is pretty much zero. So when you write your test too early, you can write your test too early. I think you can, if you invest too much in them right away, it's kind of wasted time in a way, because you have to go back and revamp. It's better to validate that the client or whoever is happy with the functionality, and then go in and add your UI tests to really shore up that test or that functionality is working correctly. And of course, this all depends on how things go, and this is kind of an opinion of mine. Take it with a grain of salt, but that's kind of how I feel about it. I don't You could use TDD to write your tests. I just don't think it's really the best idea.
Got it. Okay. Couple of questions on, and we had this the previous session too, around Cypress and WebdriverIO, how they're different. What are your thoughts on the two different ways of thinking, really?
Yeah, so they do kind of tackle the same task. They take care of the same task, which is UI testing the website front end. And so they're pretty similar there. The ways that they're different is WebdriverIO is a bit more about customizing it to your needs. Cypress is a little bit more about, here's an out-of-the-box solution that works for you. So one example of that is where you're going to run your test. With WebdriverIO, you get to choose whether you want to run it through Chrome driver, Selenium standalone, the third-party service that you're going to use when you want to do like CI/CD integration, which CI/CD tool you're going to use. And I think actually Cypress allows for you to choose to do custom CI/CD integrations. But with Cypress, it's a little bit more about we're going to provide this out of the box functionality, and you don't have to think about it, which is really great if you don't want to have to think about it. If you don't want to spend a lot of time tinkering with these services and trying to get everything up and running and customizing it all. If you just want something that allows you to write tests and move on and find a lot of value out of them quickly, I think Cypress.io is a great option, because it has that through their support, or through their kind of core functionality. They have a lot of that built in. So a great example is like the test runner itself. With WebdriverIO, you have to manually set that up, which doesn't take too much time. But if you want to run your tests in an integrated environment, you do have to manually set that up through getting your services configured and your CI/CD configured. Whereas with Cypress, it's already there out of the box. Yeah, so that's kind of the main difference between the two, I would say, is WebdriverIO has a lot. Uh, WebdriverIO really has that extendable customization aspect to it, but Cypress.io really has that out of the box functionality to get you up and running really fast.
Got it. Okay. All right. I think we have time for one more question. The question is, what's the best visual regression testing tool to use with WebDriver? But I think maybe you can just talk about some of the tools that WebDriver already integrates with when it
Yeah.
comes to visual regression testing.
Yeah, visual regression testing is something I've definitely been interested in over the years, and I would say from the best tool, the one that there's two main ones that have really stuck around. Those are Percy.io and Applitools. Those have really kind of they've lasted. So there's a lot of tools that might pop up but don't really stick around. Those are the two that really have come up time and time again. And so either one of those should be pretty good. There's also open source versions. WebdriverIO has a visual regression service. The thing that makes me hesitate about recommending those is visual regression really it does have a manual approach to it. So you have to manually go in and check that the differences between the screenshots, whether it's just a minor difference or if it's an actual difference that actually matters. And so there's that manual aspect to it. And when you use something like an open source tool, it just doesn't have that extra functionality that makes that manual aspect kind of flow and be a little bit more streamlined. So I would really recommend, if you have the ability to, I would pay for one of those services, because I think that extra functionality it'll really save you a lot of time over the long run and make it easier if you're working on a team to integrate and integrate this style of testing with the rest of the team, because it really is a style of testing that's that's almost outside of UI testing. It's still, you're testing the same things. It's just a very different style of doing it. And with that, you got to kind of handle it differently.
Got it. All right. And last question is, I think a couple of people asked this. I think you mentioned earlier on in your deck presentation about WebdriverIO being React friendly.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean by that? In quotes, React friendly.
Yeah, it's basically, it allows you to select elements using their React props, using the React data. I forgot what the other one was. And then it also has that shadow DOM support. So if you need to take a look at an element that's inside of the shadow DOM that React uses, you can do that. I don't test React websites, so I can't be too specific or give too many specific examples of this. But if you go back to that the blog on WebdriverIO, there are one or two articles about React support. And then I think there's also a guide on it if you go to the guide section in there. So you can find out a lot more in there, and that'll probably make a lot more sense because I don't have as much experience with it as the people who wrote those guides.
Awesome. All right, great. Thank you, Kevin. Really appreciate you taking the time to sort of give us that introduction to WebdriverIO and walking us. I think you did a great job walking us step by step through the process of installing it and getting it running. So thank you. Thanks again. Really appreciate it. Awesome. And I think thanks, everyone. I think a big thank you to all the speakers, both today, David and Kevin. And last week, we had David cover Selenium, Jan Scheffler covering Puppeteer, and then Amir covering Cypress. So I think a big thank you to all the speakers for taking time out from their days to do this for us. Before you leave, I just wanted to announce the BrowserStack pack again. So all of you will get a 1-month free access to all of our products. The team will be putting a link to the page where you can claim your pack. So please make sure that you do that on the chat. Just check out the link of the chat interface. And lastly, I think when we end this session, you will get a survey which will ask you for some feedback. It just takes barely 30 seconds to give us your feedback about Summer of Learning and specifically around today's session. So we love your feedback. We always want to improve. We always want to give you content and bring speakers to you that will add value and that you will love watching. So please give us your feedback and thank you all for attending. It's been a great pleasure hosting Summer of Learning this year. I think across the 2 days we've probably crossed 2,000 attendees. So thanks again, all of you, for attending. Have a great rest of the day and the rest of the year. All right, thank you all. Bye.